All right, everybody, it's 4 o'clock. If you could find your seats. So we had our business meeting this morning, some great breakout sessions, hopefully some good conversation. Now wanted to take a minute to introduce you to our keynote speaker today. So Jared Luhman is joining us. I will let him give all his credentials and background because he can do it much more smoothly than I can. But excited to hear from Jared today. I know he's got lots of great things to share with us, and I think he'll be available for some questions and things at the end as well. So, Jared, take it from here.
Awesome. Can I take this out?
Yes.
Thanks, folks. So I apologize right off the bat. I got a cold like a week ago, and I was feeling better. And then yesterday morning, I woke up and I couldn't talk. So I don't know what happened. I apologize. You're going to have to listen to me talk like this for the next while. I hope that doesn't distract you so much that you're not able to get something out of this, but you can hear me okay if I talk like this? Awesome. Again, I'm so sorry. I felt so bad. I was like, what timing? Of course, yesterday I had a podcast to interview, to record, and then this today. What are the odds? But it's all good. I haven't been sick in years, and I've never lost my voice. And of course, it happens 2 days in a row when I'm supposed to use my voice. But such is life. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about CalCap profitability, and some things are going to be applicable to your context. Some are going to be applicable or not applicable. I didn't realize what I was thinking. North Central was North Central Iowa. Kind of learned it's Midwest now, not just Iowa. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about from my context in Southeast Minnesota may be very different than yours, but hopefully there's something throughout this presentation you can apply to your operations, to your account, to the environment, your context. I would welcome questions throughout. If you want to throw up your hand or ask questions, ask for clarification, go ahead. I have no problem with that. Otherwise, you're welcome to hold questions till afterwards, or you can just, not whatever you prefer. A little bit about myself. Talk about credentials. I don't have all this credentials with any of that, but my farm and what we do, I farm with my family, my dad, John, his wife, Terry, and my wife, Valerie, in Southeast Minnesota, right in between Rochester and the Twin Cities, just about 15 minutes off the Mississippi River. We farm about 900 acres total, of which about 350 that would be considered tillable acres, and the rest is perennial pasture. Something about the context of our environment that is frustrating and a challenge, but it's something we have to deal with is that pretty much the only ground that's in permanent pasture is the stuff that people can't farm. It's the 30 acres here, the 50 acres there. It's too wet, too woody, too rocky, too steep. So we've managed about 550 acres of permanent pasture that's spread on 8 different sites from 10 miles west of our home site to 13 miles northeast. And that's been a real pain. Limits obviously our ability to be efficient and manage large groups and spread our labor overheads over more animals. It's frustrating, but it's also been a niche that's allowed us to be competitive, because in row crop country, we have 350 acres of crop land. We're not competitive row crop farmers. We're not very intelligent. We don't have the best technology. Our planter, tractor, and planter is like 4430, and an old white planter that is less value than the tires on some people's new tractors alone. So we're not very good crop farmers, but we've considered ourselves to be decent cattlemen and good grazers. And in a world where everybody wants to be a crop farmer and pastors looked at the land that they can't make a living on, we can look at that with opportunity, and we've been able to make some money on that. We run about 230 registered red Angus cows. We're cooperative producers for Family Cattle Company, which is the number 9 largest seed stock producer in the United States. They market about 1,100 bulls a year. And for being such a large producer, almost nobody's heard of them. And if they've heard of them, most of the producers think they're nuts. We're low input, moderate frame cattle, bred to be, kind of tough and match and adapt to an environment. And I'll talk about all that a little bit more later. My wife and I own Grass-Fed Cattle Company. It's our direct marketing business. That's what's on my shirt. Just this morning before I came down here, I was up in the cities doing our meat pickups this morning in Edina. So we have customers come pick up meat there. We market grass-fed beef, pastured pork, and pastured chicken from our farm, as well as a couple other farms in southeast Minnesota and in Wisconsin. Pastured chicken, we raise about 500 to 1,000 birds a year on grass, of which we market all of that through Grass-Fed Cattle Company. And then in the last 3 years, we've gotten into something kind of new for us of doing custom grazing for a large commercial dairy that's 1,200 cows about 5 or 10 miles away from us. They send us dairy heifers to run on the pasture during the summer months. And actually, I don't know that I will talk about that later, so I guess I can talk about that a little bit now. The reason why we love doing that, or why it's really intriguing to us, is because we're able to run cattle on grass. They come when grass is growing and they leave when grass is gone. We have no equity tied up in livestock, no cost into feed. It's been a really good way to do it. And working with dairy farmers, what we found is they're like the only folks that we've found who understand the value of feed. And so they pay a fair price. We get $2.20 per animal unit to graze those animals per head per day, or per animal unit per day. But I know folks getting $2.40 to $2.60 per day too. And so it's actually quite competitive. We can actually compete with row crops on tillable land, doing a custom graze model with no equity tied up in livestock and no feed expenses. And that's been a really good enterprise that we'd like to scale. It comes with its challenges. I don't know if folks have worked trying to train Holstein dairy cows to polywire that have never seen it in their life, but they can be pretty dumb. We'll just leave it at that. But that's why I guess we get paid the big bucks to do it. So it's an opportunity. But talking a little bit about goal setting. Everybody has different goals that they might use to kind of shape their decision making around. You know, we have everything we do. We don't just do for no reason. We don't feed because we want to feed. We feed because of something. What is the goal? What is the goals that producers use to make those decisions? And I'm curious, you know, do you have any thoughts on that? What goals do producers typically use to base their decisions around? A lot of times goals that I'll hear in commercial agriculture is weaning weights. You know, we base the decisions, how we feed, how we manage our cattle about getting maximum weaning weights. Or we might base our decisions around just trying to break even, right? You know, I'd love to not have to take money from my off-farm job or my spouse's off-farm job to be able to farm. That's a pretty good goal, or even better yet, if we're really shooting for the moon, I'd love to even be cash flow positive, bring more money in than I have going out. I think a lot of people say that might be a fairy tale or a dream in agriculture. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, you know, if you wanted to make more money, you shouldn't have gone into agriculture. And I look at my brother as a computer software science engineer, making way more money for way less work, and I'm thinking maybe sometimes you're right. That being said, I'm also seeing cow-calf producers and folks in grazing-based agriculture being very profitable and very successful in it. And so that is kind of the goal that I focus a lot of our decisions around: how we feed, what we feed, how we manage and graze, the type of animals that we select for, are all based around a goal of making our operation more profitable. And so what is profit, right? It seems kind of obvious. Everybody thinks, or what's the difference between profit and cash flow? The definition of profit I'm going to use, that we use on our farm, I steal from the Ranching for Profit School. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of or been to that. It's a phenomenal program. It's a 1-week class, but it's a ton of information packed into that week. But they define profitability as the operating business being able to pay for all of these things and still make a positive return. So let's walk through those. Cash rent for land. This seems obvious, but what this means too is if we have paid for land, then all we have to pay is property taxes on it. That doesn't mean that that's our only expense that we get to charge to our operating business. We have to charge full value of that land, whatever that pasture rent is, or in our case, we have some of our tillable acres in pasture. Those tillable acres are worth $250+ per acre in rent, whereas pasture in our county is only $90 per acre, or $75 or $60. Does that mean that we get to charge $60 an acre to our cows when we put tillable ground into pasture. No, we have to charge that full $250. And even if it's owned, I like to look at it this way, if it helps you think about it differently, is we have a land ownership business, we have an operating business. They're separate businesses, and each business has to be paid fairly and compensated for its own assets. Alternatively, if you have a mortgage on property and that mortgage is $500 an acre, the operating business, those cows shouldn't be expected to carry the mortgage. Those cows are only expected to pay the land business for what that land is worth. And we'll talk about a little bit later how what you use to pay mortgages is profit. That's not an expense to the operating business. Full cost of labor, same kind of thing. It's real easy, and I see it all the time where producers have an off-farm job, or they have spouses that work off the farm, and so they say, I don't need to draw an income off the farm. We expect our operating business to pay for labor, whether we use it off the farm or we reinvest it, that's one thing, but we write it in as an expense up front that our operating business is expected to pay for labor. And that's fair market rent or fair market labor as well. If you work, full-time, 3,000 hours a year, and you only pay yourself 25 or 30 grand a year because that's what you need to live on, that's not really fair market for your labor. If you were to get an injury or needed to replace yourself, chances are you wouldn't be able to do that for $30,000, at least not in a full-time cattle enterprise. So we demand our business to pay full value for labor, either an hourly rate or a salary. And also, we don't expect the business to pay $15 an hour for management type work, $100 an hour type work. We expect it to pay management salary, management wages for management jobs. Interest on all assets used in production. This is one that was a kind of a light bulb moment for me. I kind of talked earlier about how we have an operating business, cow-calf business, whatever that business is, and then a land business. Well, we also have an equity business. We can look at ourselves as a bank. An operating business or cow-calf business, when it borrows money from a bank, it's expected to pay a certain interest rate or return on that equity. It's a cost of capital. We also have equity or capital tied up in a business, whether that's in cows that are paid for or even partially paid for, or tractors, or very rarely are people operating 100% in debt. There's no banks out there that I know of that will lend 100% of value. And so we have some sort of equity tied up in a business, and that equity should demand a return. In a zero risk rate of return in a bond market, you can get 4 or 5% return on your capital. You can put it in the stock market and over the long term get 7, 8, 9, 10+%. You can put it in real estate or leveraged real estate and get 15+%. It's not that difficult. And so why should we put equity into a business and expect no return on that equity? So we demand a return on our equity as an expense up front for any equity that we have in the business. And that's just a simple expectation that we don't necessarily write these checks, but we write it in as an expense when we're analyzing our business. And then all other costs of production as well, the obvious things, your feed, your bulls, your hay, mineral, whatever vaccination costs you might have along the line, those costs obviously. But those top 3 are the ones that aren't often checks that we write. We don't write those checks so we don't see them, but they're real expenses or opportunity costs that need to be accounted for. And after all of those expenses are accounted for, what's left after that is what I define as profitability. And I think it's important to recognize that, because we need to know where we stand in terms of our business model before we can move forward. And to kind of demonstrate this example a little more, with a little more of a scenario, an anecdote. I gave a talk in Minnesota, and before this individual, I did not give that definition of profitability in that talk. And this is why I've somewhat included that definition now, because he came up to me, he was telling me, Jared, I've got the most profitable farm. It's so awesome. Let me tell you about this scenario that I got. I own 50 acres of pasture free and clear. I have 30 cows free and clear. I have this little line of equipment. It's nothing special, but it gets the job done. And since I'm in crop country, all of my neighbors have ditches and waterways. They want them clipped. They want them clean. They don't care about the hay. They say, if you come and clip them and keep my pasture or my ditches and waterways clean, you can have the grass for free. I mean, since I have an off-farm job, I don't really need any money from the farm. So my hay is free. I have a little bit of fuel into it, but I'm making so much money, he says. And so my question for you guys is that business profitable? Anybody have thoughts? Maybe. That's the right answer. The truth is, based on that information, we don't know. We don't know how profitable he is. I'll save you all of the going through all the numbers. We talked a little bit after that session, and then we sat down together at lunch and we went through his numbers even more depth, and we found out that he was break even at best. When those cows got charged fair value for that hay, when he got charged for labor and he demanded a return out of his equity, it was break even at best. More likely it was a net loss. And so then we started to discuss alternatives. We said, well, let's just say you take those 30 cows and you sell them and you got $60,000. And you take that little line of equipment, it's nothing special, it breaks down and you got to fix it, you got to deal with that. Let's say you sell it, another $60,000. And then all that hay, that grass is still a really good opportunity, but you just hire someone to come in and custom cut, rake, and bale it. And then you take that hay and you sell it because you don't have any cows to feed in the winter. Well, you still have all this grass here. So we talked about custom grazing. He's about 40 miles from where I live. And so I told him, we're just down the road from you. We're getting 220 per animal unit per day. And we worked out what he could get for grazing out that ground, custom grazing somebody else's cattle at that rate. And then he had all his winters off too. He said, you can either take that time and go feed the neighbor's cows, or you can take the kids to Miami, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. You have all this freedom that you didn't before and all this money that you can put into some investment. And we found that scenario was significantly more profitable and generated significantly more revenue. But had he never looked at it from this perspective of true economic profit as opposed to just cash flow, he never would have realized that his return on his equity and assets was really quite low. And so this is the importance of why I talk about defining profitability, is so that we can analyze our businesses with open eyes and honesty and recognize, here we are. Am I happy with this? If that's the case, you're fine with it. That's totally fine. And I want to make that point here clear too. I hear all the time people say, I once almost was like booed off stage, someone saying like, what if I just love my cows and I want to operate like this and I'm fine taking a lower return? I said, there's no problem with that. There's zero problem with it. It's just important to recognize where we are. The next scenario that we went through, we jumped out. We didn't even touch what I'm going to talk about for a lot of the rest of this presentation is how can we make cow-calf businesses more profitable? How could we, there were a lot of ways that we could have worked with him to improve his cow-calf business, and he could have generated significant profit and not have had to leave that business model entirely. And so that's what we're going to spend a lot more time. But does that make sense on the profitability, what I'm trying to get across here? Hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. The other cool thing that we can discuss when we talk about profitability, instead of just taking by and making even this, what can we do with profit? You know, I hear all the time from people that I'd like to be home full time. I'm sick of working off the farm. Or my spouse is sick of working off the farm. She wants to be home raising our kids, or he wants to be home helping me on the farm too, or something like that. Well, when we can focus on generating more profit, we can look at bringing them home and doing that. Also expanding our business. This is another reason why it's so important to analyze our numbers that way, is let's just say two farmers, you have 300 acres and 150 cows, and they're paid for and you're cash flowing and life is good. And the neighbor comes to you and he says, I'd like to lease you my 300 acres and sell you my 150 cows. And you think, man, I'm cash flowing so good. I've got all this money coming in. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to be even more successful taking over my neighbor's farm. And so you do it. And you go get a loan from the bank. You buy his cows. You lease that land. All of a sudden you find out you're a little more busy than you were. So you got to hire somebody else to come help you. Now you have a whole bunch of cash expenses that you weren't accounting for prior. And you maybe realize that business model wasn't profitable. Now you're generating even less cash flow than you were pre-expansion. And so analyzing those numbers allows you to move forward with confidence in expansion opportunities. And I think that's one of the most important things. If somebody comes and says, I'd like to lease you my land and sell you my cows, if you've analyzed your numbers and you know your business in a true economic model that's accounting for all of the cash costs that you may or may not incur, but to do this expansion you would incur, it gives you the ability to move forward with confidence. That's one of the most important things. Similarly, it allows you to buy land. I kind of talked about this. We buy land with profit. That's not an operating expense. That's an investment that we as individuals can make into a land investment business. And we can only do that with profit. Because very rarely does the rent from the land or even the production from the land pay for land rent. Now, maybe it does where you guys are, but in Southeast Minnesota, there's very, very, very little ground that you can find that will pay for itself with either the rent or the production that you can generate off of that. Travel. Anybody ever said or heard the saying, I haven't been off the farm and taken a vacation in 13 years? Anybody ever said that or heard that said? You guys are here, which is awesome. You guys have been able to get away. That's super important and valuable, but it's almost something like in agriculture that we're proud of. I'm like, that is so sad. If you haven't been able to get away from the farm in 13 years, I question whether you have a business or a job with a really, really, really bad PTO policy. You know, we want to be able to travel, and those are things that we can do when we have a business that's profitable. Be outrageously generous. I'm still young, I don't have that much money, so I've not been able to experience this, but from the little that I have experienced, there's very, very few things that bring as much joy as being generous. And when we can have additional profit and start looking at doing those things, that's exciting. Bring family into the business, kids, spouses, nephews, friends. You know, we want to work with more people that we love and care about, but it's a challenge. A lot of people I hear, again, all the time, folks say, you know, there's just not enough to go around. The pie isn't big enough to bring in more people. That's something we can do. And the next thing is we can hire out work that we don't like. That's accounting, or maybe you hate fencing, but you've never felt like you could justify hiring a contractor to come and do it. But when we have a business that's really profitable, we can look at hiring out a lot of the ones that we don't enjoy. And so I challenge you all to think, you know, not just think, I'm in agriculture because I love it. It's a lifestyle business. But what would I do if I had more profit than I have now, that I knew was possible? And that why is sometimes one of the biggest, most powerful impactors of change or drivers of change, is when we have a powerful or a strong why. So, you know, I challenge you all to think about that a little bit. So this brings us to the next question then, is are most cow-calf producers profitable? And I stole this from the University of Missouri. It's their beef cow-calf planning budget for 2024. And I don't know about you, but when I looked at it, I was blown away. And then it showed the average cost to keep a cow for a year in 2024 at over $1,700. Anybody else surprised? Or maybe y'all think that's pretty fair. I was surprised. I was very surprised. That's high. That means that, according to this budget, the highest historic cow-calf prices that we've had in history, the average producer is still expected to lose over $100 per cow. That's kind of crazy. Why I chose this one is that I like how they come from the numbers. I think they come from what people don't always account for. Two is that it's the highest number they'll find of all universities, so that really helped prove my point. I looked at a lot of other universities, and when I ran the numbers myself, 1,700 was a bit high. There's like a ton of ways that you can work to reduce it. Don't look at this and say, "Oh, I'm in the business." Ask. Maybe producers are quite different. So why is this the case? Why are so many ranches that were bought and paid for operating like we're operating now, losing money with equity and with, you know, operating businesses the same way they always were? And this is the slide that I stole from Jim Harris. Jim Harris is an entrepreneur, a grazing expert, a consultant. He does work all over the country and the world. But essentially, he was comparing the data of a few price points of different inputs associated with a high input production level of cow-calf. And he chose 4 specific ones: a round baler, fuel, fertilizer, and labor. Those are 4 of the big expenses associated with a high input cow-calf production level. And he compared the prices from 1973 to 2023 and found that over those 50 years, the cost of those inputs increased between 800 and nearly 3,000%. But when you compare that to the value of the product that we are selling, which is fed beef, the value of that is only increased at a rate of 181%. Maybe start to make a little more sense why businesses that were bought and paid for 50 years ago, operating in a certain production model, are losing equity or going backwards today. The economic comparison, the cost structure of the cow-calf business has totally changed. And I think this is cool because I think a lot of times if I was to come out here and say, we're not profitable and you're operating, all stupidly and your family, your parents, your grandparents operating the way they did made no sense. This is showing that it maybe did. Our grandparents, our parents, our ancestors, they made sense to do what they did when they did it. The economics of that industry at that time justified the expense and it made sense to do that, but it's changed. And we can't continue to operate the same way that we always have because the models have changed. And so we have to change our business model. And with that, I'll kind of shift towards talking about how we do this, hopefully a little less doom and gloom that hopefully I didn't lose you here in the first few minutes anyway. I'm going to start talking about what the type of cow is that I believe you need to be profitable in today's economic model. And I recognize that actually when I was looking into a little bit on the Highland breed, what I saw is you guys maybe match a lot of this already. You can maybe have an advantage. But one thing that I want to say is that breed is far less important than production model. I have a lot of people come to me and say, what breed is the best breed? Now, I'm a Red Angus breeder, so obviously I tell them Red Angus, no doubt, 100%. Yeah, you got to be a Red Angus breeder. Everybody agree? No, I don't tell them that. Tell them I'd love for you to buy Red Angus, but it's far more important that you buy a cow from the right production model, not a certain breed. Feral Cattle Company, we have 1,100 bulls that we sell a year. We sell Black Angus, Red Angus, Herefords, crossbreds, heat tolerance, a bunch of different bulls. And I would say our Red Angus are far more similar to any other breed in the Feral Cattle Company program than they are to any other Red Angus in the Red Angus Association. Our production model is totally different. So I wouldn't encourage someone to go out and buy a Red Angus because it's a breed that they need, or a Highland because it's a breed they need, but to match the production model, the cow, and that production model that cow was developed in, to the production model that they want to operate within. The operating model that I want to operate in has this type of a cow. The cow that is a frame score 3 to 4, 11 to 12 pounds. A lot of times when people say frame score 3 to 4, well, that's like a dwarf. That's a mini cow, isn't it? You guys maybe know, but the average breed, the average cow frame score is in that 6 to 8 range, really largely throughout the U.S. And if I'm talking about a 3 to 4, what do people think that I'm talking about doing to those cows? Going from a 6 to 8 to a 3 to 4, cutting it in half. People think that's what I'm doing. I mean, talking about the old belt buckle cattle, they think I'm going to like kneecap, cut these cows in half. That's not the case at all. Frame scores move in increments of 2 inches. So the difference between a 6 and a 3 frame score cow is just 6 inches. It's the difference of that roughly. It's not this huge drastic change that makes cows completely unmarketable, ridiculously small, and nothing that we can ever do anything with. These are perfectly moderate cattle that have the ability to produce a marketable calf in the rest of the industry, but are far more efficient foragery systems and low input systems, which I'll continue to talk about later. We found that frame score cow roughly 1,100 to 1,200 pounds. The next 3 I'm going to talk about together: low maintenance, easy flushing, and fertility. Every cow, sheep, human living creature has a certain level of maintenance energy that it has to meet before it can divert energy towards anything else, towards milk production, towards conditioning, the condition of their own body. And so we're selecting for low maintenance cattle that have a low maintenance energy requirement because they can more rapidly start turning the nutrition they're taking in into something more valuable, body conditioning. Easy flushing and fertility are going to go along with that because, again, the quicker they make their maintenance energy, the quicker they convert energy towards flesh, bringing flesh in the body. We know that body condition, the common right body condition, the time of breeding is incredibly important to getting them ready. Cows that very two body condition score, shell cow. It's not gonna, it looks like a Holstein, is a very low likelihood of getting it. So we want cows that will quickly get back in condition. The other thing with easy flushing is not just the ability to put on flesh with high quality food, the ability to put on and maintain flesh with low quality food. 2 weeks ago, it was 20 below, 50 mile an hour winds for a week straight, 4 inches of snow, and our cows were grazing through 4 or 5 inches of snow, grazing corn stalks for that whole week with no protein supplement, no energy supplement. All they had was access to salt and water on the tank. Frozen. And they maintain body flesh through that, and corn stalks alone. That's the type of cow that I was, is a cow that can be tough and put on flesh and maintain flesh in very poor conditions, and then get rebred. We'll talk just a little more about this in a bit. Fertility is incredibly important. I'll probably throw out this a few times when you mentioned the idea of depreciation in a cow herd. Cows depreciate very rapidly when they go from bred to open. Right? Might have a cow that's worth $2,000 to $2,500 be worth $1,000 she comes up open. That's a $1,500 depreciation or expense in 1 year. So it's incredibly important that we focus on getting our cows bred every year for a long, long time. Thickness and depth of body, the type of cow that's going to thrive on forage is going to be this. When I talk about depth of body, the rough rule of thumb I like to use is if you're looking at the distance from a back to the ground of a cow, I want to see 60% of that being actual body, belly of the cow. I've seen cows that are like closer to 40. They're like less thin things, and they're not going to thrive 20 below 15-mile-an-hour winds on corn stalks for 4 months on herds. So having that depth of body animal that can take a large amount of low quality feed and convert it to nutrition. Longevity, we have a zero excuse policy. If a cow comes up open, if a cow doesn't wean a calf every single year, she's coming. That happens if we run over its calf. That's totally our fault. Zero excuses. And every now and then, we might get rid of a cow. We should. It was a good cow. By giving no excuses, we're not actually getting rid of every cow that was. No excuses. And usually in a low input system where we're pushing our cows to work out hard, ones that can't handle that, they fall out. They come up open. And people just think, I talk about running our cows the way that we do, but we're just letting them fall over dead. That's not what we do. Usually they come up open before they fall over dead. We sell them. So they may work perfectly fine in somebody else's system, but I don't want them in ours. But the importance of longevity, it goes back to that depreciation curve again. The more calves you can have out of a cow before she comes up open, the more calves you can spread that depreciation over. So if you have $1,000 in depreciation that you spread over 3 calves, it's over $300 per calf in depreciation. We don't have a lot of margin left for profit. If you spread that over 15 calves, now you've got $66, is that roughly, in depreciation per calf? It's a lot lower cost, and there's even more margin in there for you. Another thing that I talk about with fertility, and you guys are a breed association, you may or may not agree with this. I get in debates with sometimes with that fellow seed stock producer in Minnesota. He's a buddy of mine, so it's okay. But he says the best bulls you'll ever get are out of your heifers. And theoretically, they've got the furthest genetic, development. The more generations of genetic improvement they should theoretically become. I'm not going to argue. But when I look at my bulls, and I look on the Farrow County Company page, I'm looking at all the different bull options, and I see a bull out of 2 bulls out of different, that have very similar evaluations. We do a whole bunch of evaluations, very similar evaluations, similar genetic EPDs, different things like that. But I see 2 differences, or just a difference in the cow age. I see one's on a heifer and one's on a 13-year-old cow. To me, that 13-year-old cow has proven herself. She's had 12 calves, because I know that production model. She's had 12 calves every single year, never missed. She's been pushed through tough environments, tough winters, no supplement, no babying, and she's produced a calf 12 years in a row. That bull is something I'm very interested in. As opposed to that heifer, she may very well be an amazing heifer, but I won't know that for another 10 plus years. And so to me, longevity is an important piece of my selection criteria as well. Quality udders, everybody wants quality udders. This isn't something I have to talk to about for a long time. It's something that we'll talk about several times throughout this talk. Is labor as an overhead. Labor is one of our biggest expenses. And in calving season, I've got friends, and I've seen cow-calf producers that they're almost having to get every calf sucking on the cow for the first time. They got to strip out the teats. They got to help them go. That's labor, that's time, that's hassle, that's overhead, that's risk. That's most of the time, those early calving cows are the craziest ones in the bunch. They may be perfectly docile cows, but that's when the highest risk of incident is. So we want quality udders so we don't have to deal with that. Structural soundness. These cows are on travel. They're not sitting in a bunk eating every day. They're working for their food. They're working for their living. And a cow we expect to live 15 years. She's got to be a structurally sound cow. Disposition. I didn't used to have this one on this slide, but this spring, I learned the value of disposition. We don't have crazy cattle. This wasn't even an incident from it, but we were sorting out some steers and the steer tried to get by me and I slipped on the ice and headbutted by a steer, completely shattered the left side of my face. And it was a moment that taught me how quick you can go from loving what you do to spending 2 months on a couch or just recovering. Now, fortunately, thanks to modern medicine, the doctors were able to make me look as bad as I did before. So I'm back to normal, back to 100%. But disposition is super important. We have people come to our farm all the time and say, how are your cattle so calm? I've never seen cattle this calm. I'm like, why did they deal with anything else? There is no difference in the cost to feed a cow for a year between a cow that's crazy and a cow that's docile and calm and enjoyable and will let you scratch her head out in the pasture that comes. Those are the kind of cows. And of 230 cows, we don't have any that are aggressive. Only time we might get a little bit of aggressive again is when we're calving. And because we're registered producers, we're doing the beer quality, underscoring, weighing, all these things that if I was a commercial producer, I don't even know that I'd mess with them when they're calving at all. But because we do, we have to deal with that. In disposition, we actually score for disposition at calving as well. We want a cow that we'll score a negative for a cow that walks away when we're calving. We don't want a cow that's super not maternal either. We want a cow that's ideally standing about 10 feet away, looking at us, watching us, but not messing with us. I've had in the past cows that, we're on the other side of the four-wheeler, while one person's, my dad's there with a stick. Trying to keep them from process that cat from those cows, we'll keep notes of and get them gone, just like we get rid of the cows that are walking away when we start messing with their calves. We want that ideal cow that's going to watch, maintain, but not be aggressive towards us. Winning a higher percentage of the value. This one goes a couple different ways. It's important, but it's not something we want to select purely for. If you have an 1,800-pound cow and you move to 1,200-pound cows, that 1,800-pound cow might produce a 600-pound calf, but that 1,200-pound cow is likely not going to produce a 400-pound calf. Just because you drop a third of the size of the cow, you shouldn't drop a third of the size of the calf. So you have a higher percent of weaning of that cow. Now, when you select purely for weaning weight percentage, what are you selecting for? What are your thoughts on that? You're selecting for higher milking cows. That's, I apologize again. We don't want to select purely for milk. Back to that low maintenance, once they reach their maintenance energy, they can divert energy towards, putting on condition or putting on milk. And if you have a high milking cow that's winning the highest percentage of body weight year after year after year, she's likely a cow that's more of that energy towards milk production and likely isn't putting as much to her body condition, is more likely to come up open. So you want to find balance between selecting for a high percentage of the weaning body, but also still putting on flesh. And to demonstrate this a little bit more, there's two examples that I like to share. Two farms identical in size, identical in forage type. The only difference in these two scenarios is that farm one has 1,500-pound cows, farm two has 1,250-pound cows. So farm one stocks 84 of those 1,500-pound cows. Those cows weigh 600 pounds. That works out to 40% of their body weight weaned, or a total of 50,400 pounds weaned at $220 a pound is a total of $110,880. Farm two, with 1,250-pound cows, is able to stock 100 of those cows in the same land base, same forage. Those cows are going to produce 550-pound calves, which is weaning 44% of their body weight for a total of 55,000 pounds. And the other cool thing about lighter calves they're valued at a higher price per pound. So not only are we producing more total pounds, those pounds are worth more price per pound for a total of nearly $13,000 in additional revenue generated purely by having a different size cow. And this doesn't include anything of considering which cow is more likely going to come up open, which cow is likely going to need more supplement or feed to get through a winter, which cow might have more calving troubles or whatever else. You know, there's a lot of other considerations. Purely looking at cow size, though, the ability of a smaller animal to raise more pounds per acre as opposed to pounds per cow. This is a thing that I try to talk about often, is shifting our perspectives when we're talking about producing pounds. We're going to shift that perspective from producing pounds per cow to producing pounds per acre or per ranch, because an example that I've heard used several times too is, you know, how about when we select for corn? You know, corn yields, we're selecting based on yield per acre. If we wanted to select for maximum yield per cob, per plant, we would likely space out the plants, run a lot lower population, give them a lot more space, sunlight, nutrition, and have massive cobs, but would have less production per acre. Production per cob or per cow, per unit of production doesn't matter. What matters is total production per acre or per farm. And so that's the focus that I want to shift our mindsets towards with the cow side. But moving the topic to another issue, or another thing that affects profitability quite significantly, is our calving season. When are we calving? We've chosen to calve on our farm April 15th to May 31st. We have a 45-day window. I'll get into that here in a bit. But we have selected this as our calving season because it aligns the animal's highest nutrient requirement with when nature has an abundance of quality and quantity of feed. There's a bunch of other little benefits. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but the other little benefits is bedding, for one example. We used to calve in the middle of March, and we calved in the shed, in a barn. We don't have a nice bale processor. This is an old pole barn, so get out, open a gate, drive in before the cows get out, shut the gate, bounce corn stalks around, do the same thing to get back out, and pitchfork corn stalks around for hours. It's a joke, but it's really serious. I don't know if anybody else has this problem when you're a farmer and winter's a little slower. I put on a lot of weight over winter. Holiday season was rough on me. I watched a lot of Netflix, ate a lot of things I probably shouldn't eat. I put on 20 pounds over the winter, pretty much shaved that off in 2 weeks of calving in March. I lost a lot of weight. It was exhausting. So we don't need the bedding anymore. We don't need to do all that. They can't run things. We need this. If we need to be pasture in the day or whatever, so I'm not messing with it as much. We have calving troubles. I can't explain specifically why just the move from March in the shed to autumn grass, we have less cows having troubles, less misformed, backwards calves. We just have less of it. I've heard people say it's about just walking around and stuff. I don't know what it is. We just have less of those issues. Wasn't uncommon when we calved in the shed. We're not the folks to get up every 2 or 3 hours or have cameras in the barn, check cows calving morning and in the night. When they were in the shed, we'd check a couple times throughout the day because they were right there. But we wouldn't check at night. It wasn't common in the morning to come out and you find 3 cows in calf. One was in the corner abandoned, one was trampled, and 3 cows were all fighting over 1 calf. It's a total pain. When we're calving up in pasture and grass, the cows, the ones that are having a calf, they'll walk off on the corner by themselves, have their calf, get up, let the calf drink, and then get back to the rest of the group when they're ready. We're having a lot less trouble with that. We're not fighting mud and cold weather. But this is kind of what I was talking about with matching your feed and nutritional requirements with when the cow is calving. This is an example of a January, February calver. Most producers in my area like to calve then. And they're matching that nitrogen line, the nutritional requirements of a cow, is the highest when nature provides nothing. There's no feed. And so what you end up having to do is completely make up for that gap. Not just supplemental feed, but substituting feed. And when you're substituting feed completely, that's the most expensive way to feed a cow, especially when they're early lactation, because peak lactation, because that's not only a lot of feed that you have to provide, but a lot of high quality and expensive feed that you have to provide. So we moved our cattle again back to May, which is a line of kind of supply requirements of quality and quantity, which we have an abundance of quality and quantity of forage. We have 60% of our forage produced in May and June. And by doing that, we've aligned that with nature. But what we've also done is align the cow's lowest nutrient requirement when she's mid-gestation, no calf on her, dried off, with when nature provides nothing. And that's allowed us to do what I talked about earlier, with our cows into rubber grazing, composting, dormant, stockpile sorghum Siberian grass, or pasture, and do it without concern, because these cows, they don't need high quality feed. The issue, this has been a weird year. The bottom photo there is bale grazing, which we usually move to when we run out of, when it gets too much snow and ice. And snow isn't so much the issue itself as it is the snow that comes, then it thaws a little bit, and then it freezes and ices over. And my rule of thumb is if I can drive a tractor over a fence, I don't expect my cows to have to dig through that same snowdrift to get to forage. These snowdrifts, they're tight. And once when I was in college, my dad was gone in Canada, and my grandpa was getting older, and dad called me and said, the cows are walking over the fence, can you come back home? And I said, oh, fence down, which fence is down? He said, the fence isn't down, there's a snowdrift, and these 1,200-pound cows are just walking over a snowdrift over a fence. I'm like, yeah, not expect them to have to graze through that anymore. But we can do this because one is our type of cow, and two is our calving season. It's really important to line the cows, need of highest requirement for feed when nature provides it. Top middle photo is stockpiled sorghum Sudan grass. I'm not going to talk a lot about using covers and stuff today, but warm season sorghum Sudan grass is a great balancer for that summer slump. That dark blue line you'll see in the spring, it really goes up. We have this spring flush, and we have this summer slump, which is when it's really hot. Those cool season grasses slow down, and then we get a little bump in the fall. But that summer slump, we use that sorghum Sudan grass to help balance our forage supply throughout the summer. We can graze that warm season grass, and we can just let it continue to grow all summer without it losing quality like we can in cool season. If we let our cool seasons just stockpile and continue to grow, they get mature, go to seed, get rank, and the cows don't want that anymore. And so we use that warm season to help balance our forage supply chain. So another pop quiz question for the audience, and I'll just make you raise your hand so you don't have to say anything. What is the biggest impact on calf weight? Who thinks it's cow nutrition? Who thinks it's creep feed? Who thinks it's mother's milk? Who thinks it's calf growth potential, the weaning weight? Who's not paying attention or doesn't care? And who thinks it's maybe something different? The truth is it's actually something different. And it seems like a total no-brainer. It's calf age at weaning, right? Seems like an obvious no-brainer. When it was a big light bulb moment for me, the calf that's older is more likely to be heavier than a calf that's younger. And this isn't evidence or proof to say, move your calving to January, move up to next fall or the fall so they have more time by fall weaning. This is to say, talk more so on a few things here. But the big one I want to talk about here is your calving window and the importance of having a short and narrow calving window. If you have an 80 or 100-day calving window, which calf do you think? It doesn't matter if you buy the bulls with the highest weaning weights and you have cows with the highest milk production. The calf born on day 100 or day 80 is going to be lighter than the calf born on day 1, most likely, and hopefully. There might be something very wrong with calf born on day 1. Just not. So this is my super scientific study that I posted on Twitter. Twitter and social media is something I'm not usually involved in, but there's actually this cool like little niche in Twitter of ag Twitter and ranchers all over the country. That's fun. Got 252 responses with those ones talking about. 37% of producers have longer than 60-day calving window, and 92% have over a 45-day calving window. When our vets come and prep check the cow in the fall, I asked them this year, the year before that, how long are most producers in Minnesota having their bulls turned on? And they said, not uncommon to see 90 days or 120 days, and a lot of producers never pull the calves at all, or never pull the bulls at all. They calve year round, it just kind of happens when it happens. There's a lot of disadvantages for that. One is the one that I've already mentioned, about this differentiation in your calf sizes. You know, one of the biggest advantages we have in cow-calf producers in marketing our cows is having uniform calves. But one of the other biggest expenses or biggest challenges of doing that is that when you have cows calving year round, even if you only have one cow that calves in a bad time, if your cow herd is all together, you have to feed the cow herd for the nutrient requirement of the highest cow. You can't feed a third of the cows for the cows, you know, you can't feed the entire cow herd based on what the non-gestating or the gestating non-lactating cow is when you got a third of the cows over here that have calves inside. You can't pick and choose. If you run it in with one group, you have to feed the entire herd based on whatever the highest nutrient requirement cow is. Or you can separate out the groups and feed this group like this, and this group like this, and this group like this. Now we've got more hassle, more labor, and more headaches, and that's just very expensive if you're feeding a cow that is open or that is dry, like a cow that just had a calf. It doesn't make any sense. So shortening that calving window can improve your calf uniformity, your calf meeting weights, your feed efficiency and feed bills. The other thing is, which cow do you think is more likely to get bred? The cow that calved on day 1 or the cow that calved on day 80? By selecting for a shorter calving window, you're having a higher likelihood of your cow herd getting rebred. They have more time to get rebred than a cow herd, than a cow that's born on day 80. It's going to have 80 less days than cow did on day 1 to get rebred. And back to that depreciation conversation, to minimize the depreciation of our herd, it's going to be really important to give our cows the maximum ability or maximum opportunity to get rebred. This being said, there's one thing that I want to address. There's a very large difference between having a long breeding window and a long calving window. We actually have a 60-day breeding window, and our vet can preg check to the day, and we sell anything due to calve after the first 45 days. And I'd like to someday, if we have enough females that are expected or due to calve in the first 30 or even 21 days, to even move it more narrow than that. But a late calving cow is likely worth more than an open cow. And so I'm okay with having a 90-day breeding window as long as you're not having a 90-day calving window. Sell anything that's due later or due to calve later, and try and capture a little more value out of her. Maybe you go from having a $2,000 cow to having a $1,500 cow, but it's worth more than having a $1,000 cow. So minimize that depreciation, maximize the value of your animals. You can have a long breeding window, but don't have a long calving window. So to clarify, we're moving a lot of cows, we're selling a lot of cows. So where's that expense? Because we're selling them as breds, most likely, we don't have a big depreciation hit. They're paying for themselves. An advantage that we have, and likely many of you have as registered breeders, is we have genetics that are desirable. And so oftentimes the cows that we're marketing are even our less desirable ones to us, our later calving ones to us are not quite as good on her feed scores as we'd like to have, or somebody else's dream cows. We're not too concerned with our depreciation because we can manage that by marketing them as seed stock. But in general, that's the importance of not just letting them be open either. We don't want to have as many open as possible. We just want to move the ones that don't fit in their environment. And I'm not sure exactly where everybody's coming from here. Depending on your environment, if you have a herd that, for example, last week I was out in Virginia giving the same talk, and in Virginia, there's a lot of fall calvers. And if you're a spring calver and they come up open, I'm okay with you holding them entirely till the fall and turn out a bull with them a few months later and sell them as fall calvers. That might even be a better way to minimize your depreciation as opposed to selling them as open or selling them as, a little bit later in the summer too. So if you have a market to sell them as breads in a slightly different market, that's okay too. But yeah, try to avoid them going from bread to open as much as possible. And that's going to be one of your biggest ways to reduce depreciation. Part of how we manage to have so much turnover in our cows is I think I'll talk about it later. So I'll talk about it now if in case it's not. But we keep every heifer, with the exception of a couple of runts that we know aren't going to be, we give every heifer a chance to get bred. We feel nature can select better than I can. I can't tell you based looking at a heifer crop which one is going to get bred in my environment and which one's not. I can probably guess, and maybe I'd be right more times than I'd be wrong, but likely if I tried to choose, it'd be wrong. I'd be getting rid of a lot of females that I shouldn't have. So we give every heifer a chance to get bred, and part of that is we push our heifers pretty tough too. Our heifers right now are on nothing, stemmy oat hay. They're not gaining hardly anything over winter. We'll let them get compensatory gain in the summer months. We'll have a higher fallout rate on our heifers than we will on our cows. And it's by pushing our heifers hard that we have a much lower fallout rate in our cows. So we have maybe 20% open in our heifers developing in this way. Last year was the toughest we've ever been on our cows. They came into spring looking rough because of how tough last year's winter was. Then we came through summer and the worst drought we've had in over 30 years. And we grazed a lot of mature rank forages. The cows came into fall looking rough, and we still had a 95% breed up on our cow herd in a 60-day window. And so we feel that by pushing our heifers tough, we've had a really good breed up on our cows. So we have the option. We have plenty of cows within the 45-day window we want to select that that we still have some to turn over. Not exactly sure that makes sense, but hopefully it somewhat answers your question. And thank you. A reminder, if there's any questions throughout, feel free to ask or shout me off stage or whatever. If you have disagreements, that's fine too. That'll be fine. Before I move on to grazing, is there any more questions on what I've talked about so far? Type of cow, calving season, and how that affects profitability? Any more questions on that? Okay. And we'll talk about grazing management, and I'm not going to give them a huge amount of depth on this because I'm not the expert, but there's a million different names we've all probably heard for the different grazing plans, mod grazing, mid grazing, app grazing, rotational grazing, whatever. The main things that I want to focus on is it being adaptive, not just having a static plan. And I'll preface all this with saying, if you're a continuous grazer and next year you want to make a slight improvement and you want to cut your pasture in half, that's fine. I'm an advocate for making a little bit of progress in the stages that we're comfortable with. So I'm going to talk about what might be ideal, but what's ideal for your context is maybe different. We have pastures that are 13 miles away that we can only run 25 cows on. And the amount of labor that we can expect those 25 cows to justify for us to go and move them is going to be a lot less than we can justify for moving our 120 group at home. If it's going to take us 30 minutes to go move the group at home and 2 hours to go move the group 20 to 12 miles away, we get to spread the call it $10 that half an hour across 120 cows. It's a lot lower labor cost per cow than it was to spend $40 in labor costs going to and from and moving the other group spread over 20 cows. That's $2 a cow. So manage your labor appropriately for your context, your herd sizes, but any little bits that you can do to move your grazing management up to improve your grazing management is going to be advantageous. We're talking specifically about the actual grazing management. The obvious why is that it's going to increase production drastically. I've heard folks increasing production from minimum of like 25% to certain producers out west. A lot of times they see like 300 or 400% increase in production. They can take a pasture. I interviewed on my podcast one guy, Alejandro Carrillo from the Chihuahua Desert in Mexico, who went from a stocking rate of 150 cows. And his goal, he expects within a couple of years to be able to stock 1,500 cows. So 10x production on his ranch by his management. That may or may not be possible in your context. Part of that comes from additional production, and a lot of that in certain environments, especially more arid, vast spaces comes from an increase in utilization. If you have water in one spot on a section or a couple 100-acre or 1,000-acre pasture or whatever, you have a lot of the grass. Those cows probably just are never grazing. That if you can improve your grazing management, you're going to get a better utilization of the forage that you already have. But back to actual grazing management, what I would want you to control largely a couple different things, but you want to be adaptive. If you have, in my area, a lot of times people will talk about, you cut your farm into 8 equal paddocks and rotate every 3 days. It's kind of a systematic plan. And that's fine. If you have an 80-acre farm, that's 10-acre paddocks. But what are you missing on that? If you just do that, you move every farm every 3 days, and you're managing the pasture right next to the building site that grandpa hauled manure on when he was a dairy farmer for 20 years. You're managing that the same way you're managing the hillside out of the back of the farm that's not very productive. You're also managing the grass the same in the spring when you have spring flush as you're managing it in the fall when you have summer snow. And so managing your grass in a static rotation is better than a continuous graze model, but it's not ideal. You're giving up a lot of potential for improvement by managing it for the given context of that particular field, of that particular time of year, of that particular season, and its particular weather considerations. So manage as adaptively as possible to your context at any given time, but manage for 2 things largely, and that's going to be your graze period and your rest period. Your graze period is how long cows are exposed to a certain pasture. You don't want them to overgraze or be on that pasture too long to where they can take a second bite on a piece of forage. The next thing is going to be a rest period. You don't want to come back to a particular forage before that plant has had the ability to fully regrow and put down new roots. A continuous graze model, what happens is cows in the spring have way more feed than they have any idea what to do with. So they go around and they gorge themselves, filling their bellies with all this good stuff. And then midsummer rolls around and they're like, well, I've got this stuff here that I didn't get to, and now it's getting a little mature, a little rank. Or I've got this stuff that I grazed on here a few weeks ago that's not fully recovered, but it sure looks vegetative to me. So they go back and they regraze that again. And that's the worst thing you can do that for that plant. Because when you graze a plant and you graze it, from whatever height down to nothing, you've taken all the solar panel off of that plant, you've taken away that plant's ability to regrow. And it uses its root reserves to put up a new solar panel. And when you regraze that solar panel again before it's had the ability to put down those root reserves, now that plant has no roots and no solar panel. That plant's severely stunted for that year's growing season. And so by making sure they don't come back to the plant before it's ready, you're assuring that plant has the ability to put down roots and be a healthy plant to grow and be more productive the rest of the summer. Because the other thing that does is you end up at late summer, you have plants that they grazed twice and killed, and then they have the plants that they didn't even start that are super rank and immature, and the quality of that forage is absolutely horrible. And that's right when your cows are trying to get bred, they're grazing the worst quality feed and losing condition. I look at a lot of my neighbors' cows, and our cows, they come through winter looking tough. By the end of summer and fall, they're fat and happy. Our neighbors' cows come through winter in the corn silage and feed looking great, and in their grazing management, that type of cow, by fall, they're looking rough. It's like, cows are bred to feed. They're bred to eat grass, and we have cows now that can't even get fat on grass. It's like part of that's management, part of that's cow type. Overall, we want to improve grazing management that way. We can change our grazing patterns. That's one cool thing that I've experienced too, is how you set up your paddocks might impact how those cows interact with that paddock. Big squares tend to have cows more just kind of meander across, spread out. Long, narrow paddocks end up with a lot more back and forth. So maybe if you're grazing on more mature forage and you don't expect them to consume as much, you want them to trample more, graze a little bit, you might make long, narrow strips that results in more trampling. If you've got high quality feed, you don't want them trampling as much, you want to take more utilization, spread it out, bigger square, those cows will just kind of spread out. So you can actually manage your animal behavior with the paddock sizes. Another cool thing that we can do with fence and polywire I like to say that with polywire, we have the ability to manage where the cows graze at the precision of zero-turn mower. We can set up these paddocks in super specific ways. We can do things that I call like a paddock within a paddock. So you got a 10-acre paddock for a day, but there's this one little half-acre patch of thistles or goldenrod that you just can never get the cows to eat. Well, before you give them everything, build this little fence just on that little half-acre paddock. Move the cows into that, shut the gate behind them. While they're eating that, you can move your salt, your mineral feeder, move your water tank. In an hour, half an hour, those cows will trample those thistles or those goldenrod to the ground. They'll have defecated and urinated, fertilized that chunk of ground. Maybe there's a hillside you want to get more manure and urine on. Do the same thing there to concentrate manure and urine and those cattle moves. And then once you've got everything ready to go, roll up that fence and give them the rest of the daily move and move on to whatever else you want to do with your day. This is something we can do with grazing management to improve our forage, to take care of weed problems, to fertilize certain areas that we want to fertilize. This is something that we can do as well. If people talk about moving 5 times a day and the advantages of super high stock density, if we're going to get 3 rotations a year and we do maybe a fifth of the paddock every day, we're doing a paddock within a paddock over 5 rotations or a year and a half, you'll have gotten super high stock density across the whole farm. Where if that's a way you can get super high stock density without having to move 5 times a day every day for the rest of the year, you just do a paddock within a paddock once a day. So that makes sense. Questions on grazing management. Reduce our breeding costs. This is one that it's going to come down to your bulls breeding program. The Feral Cat Company, our bulls are developed grazing on forage. And I've always heard the number, 25 cows per bull. We're not afraid to turn 50 plus cows per bull with our bulls that have been developed on forage. They're breeding bulls. A couple years ago, we turned out 270 with 3 bulls. We had this 94-95% breed up rate in 60 days. Blown away. This is a fluke of a year. I mentioned the 80% breed up on heifers, not this summer, but the summer before that. We had 108 heifers. We turned out 2 bulls with them. And we found out after the first breeding cycle, one of those bulls wasn't breeding. So we put a second one in for the rest of the season. And of those 108 heifers, with only 1 bull for 21 days and 2 for the last 40 days, we had 105 bred. 3 open up, 108. That was a fluke of the year. We don't expect that kind of a breed up every year. But the point was, bulls developed the right way can breed more cows. And so if we look at the alternative of a grain finished bull, a lot of these bulls, I've talked to my fellow seed stock producers and the guys who should give you the best number possible, they say most of our bulls are probably on the program in about 3 years. So if that bull is breeding for 3 years, 25 bulls per year, it's a total of 75 calves. If you buy that bull for $5,000, you depreciate it as a feeder bull at $1,500 as a call, It's $3,500 in depreciation you've taken plus 3 years of feed costs. Divide that by the 75 calves, that works out to $75 per calf in breeding costs associated with that. If our bulls, 60, 70 cows per bull, well, let's conservatively say 50. We have our bulls in our program. We have a lot of 7, 8-year-old bulls. A lot of times we're selling bulls not because they're falling out, but because we have too many females and we can't keep using the same bull. In which case we can sell them as a breeding bull and we don't have as much depreciation. But let's say we keep them for 5 years, 50 cows per bull, 250 calves, same $3,500 loss in value, but we have an additional 2 years of the feed costs associated with that, rather than 250 calves. Our cost is $29 per calf in bull costs. So program your bulls are raised in and how many cows per bull is going to be an important part of how your breeding costs are. The other cool thing that I would recommend, this is an opportunity to network with other people. We co-own 5 bulls with another feral cattle company cooperative producer who's a fall capper. And he's in Missouri, so we co-own 5 bulls with him. Because of that, he feeds them 6 months of the year, we feed him 6 months of the year. He gets half the purchase price, we pay for half the purchase price. We get 100% use out of those bulls. And so we can take that $29 and cut it in half again. You get half the cost because we're splitting it 50-50 with this other person. A little more trucking costs, slightly higher maybe risk of injury. I don't think we've had a bull actually, however many years we've been doing this. At one point we pulled 7. I don't think we've had a bull injured yet doing this with this producer. So maybe there's someone in here who's in a different environment, calves at a different time, can pull some bulls with, reduce that breeding cost pretty significantly. Sorry, I should really move my backpack. One of these times. This is Kit Farrell shares this in his newsletter every now and then. Earl's new bull. Bring home the bull proud, excited. Trail him home after a breeding season looking like trash. I always laughed at this, thought it was a little bit exaggerated until I experienced like the exact same thing in real life. I started with Herefords. My dad has always been red Angus. When I came home from college, I was a Hereford breeder. I bought a bull from Farrell Cattle Company. He sold for $13,000. I couldn't buy him. I was still in college. Took on debt to buy the cows. So I went and found a local bull who looked phenomenal. The only negative thing the owner had to say was that his cow was too small. So I was like, perfect. I like more moderate frame cows, so it's going to be a great bull. Brought him home, and within days, he completely fell apart. These photos, the bull on the bottom right is the bull that I wanted to buy a year after the sale, and the top left is the bull that I did buy a year after the sale. Not on the cool thing, right, is really able to experience the cut season and the bull on the bottom right that I wanted to buy. So I was able to AI to a bunch of my females with him. And I got to see the experience of having a bull that matches your breeding program. It was one of the most powerful lessons I've ever learned. Was this? So I did this, and I feel like an idiot because as a breeder for Farrell Chemical, I should have known better than to buy a bull that's out of the program. But I learned a very valuable lesson there when I saw what happened to those bulls in different programs and what happened to those calves in different programs. Not one heifer out of the bull that I bought stayed in the program. Not one of his bulls made it out to the sale. And every one of the heifers that came out of the bull that we had to stayed in the program until we got rid of the Herefords. And most of those bulls made it to the sale. All this just to say, make sure you match your bull program to your production program. Don't buy a bull that doesn't match your production program. Selling versus marketing. What's the difference there? We are all selling stuff. As cow-calf producers, we think mostly we're selling calves. If that's true, that's a big part. Probably the most dollars come from the calf class of animal. We're selling a lot of different things. And we can do more intentionality behind our selling, and we call that marketing. In our program, biggest piece of our business is selling bulls. That's the most revenue that we generate, but we have a lot more things that we sell. We sell weaned calves. Not all of our bull calves are good enough to make bulls. We have to sell them somehow, and we want to generate the most revenue possible from them. And so we could just bring them to the sales barn, drop them off, and get them gone. But what we've done is focus on trying to get as much value for them. And as far as all the different classes of animal that we're selling, the smaller, lighter weaned steer calf is going to be the highest value per pound. So we're okay with selling those bull calves, those weaned calves at a commodity market, but we don't bring them to a sales barn. For 5 years, we sold them to a producer who was raising cattle for Highland Ranch. He really liked our cattle. He came back and bought them every year. A couple winters ago, feed prices were so high, he got out of the cattle feeding business. Now he started selling them to a local neighbor who's a feedlot. He's 2 miles down the road. He buys them every year. And by doing this directly, one, we save the commissions. We don't have any commissions associated with them. That's a big savings. And two, we can control shrink. We don't have to drop them off the day before at a sales barn. And they lose a ton of weight before they get weighed and sold. So we don't have nearly the shrink. Three, we can set our price to a certain point. We look at a lot of local markets. We don't get top dollar on those, but we get the fair price, above average. And oftentimes, the guy who bought in the last 2 years has taken them uncastrated, so we don't even have to process them. We're not getting that dock off of not getting them castrated yet. So that's been advantageous to us. We could just bring them off to the sale barn, but we probably make another $100 a calf just by being a little more intentional with how we market. Bred females, I'd rather sell. Part of it is our seed stock connection that we have. but we can get more value out of a bred female than just a weaned heifer, which is part of why we keep all our heifers. And we can do better. And also in our heifer development program, it's pretty darn cheap for us to develop a heifer. So we'd rather bring them, keep them over, turn them into breds, sell them as bred females than we would just bring in the heifers that we don't want to keep to a sale barn. What comes up open in our heifers is what we grass finish. We'll turn that, what would be an open heifer that we could make money on just selling essentially as a backgrounded heifer, a yearling heifer sale barn. We turn her into $4,000 a head beef. And that's been really good for us to be able to turn that cull market into a value center. The last thing is the open cull cows, the ones that come up open that are older, we can't grass finish. And those are the ones we're still struggling to try and figure out how to add value to. We've looked at a couple options here, one of which is we just started trying some beef sticks. We're looking at getting beef sticks into some breweries and gas stations. Another thing is we've had a conversation with a food truck company in the Twin Cities about starting a grass-fed beef burger food truck where we co-own the food truck, he manage that, we provide the beef. We're trying to find some way to add value to our cull cows so that we don't sell anything at the sales barn. We don't sell anything at commodity value. We want to get as much value out of every class of animal that we're selling. A little bit more on marketing. A lot of times when folks are talking about this type of an animal, is they think it's not as marketable as something else. You know, a red hide isn't as marketable as a black hide. A 1,200 pound, mature cow weight is going to be as marketable as a steer out of a 1,500 pound. And so one thing I'll say with that is there's a difference between having a maternal herd and a terminal sire. You can capture a lot of the things that the market wants in a terminal sire. The important thing is to never keep a bull out of it. You can have a red herd, moderate framed maternal cows, and crossbreed to a high gain, high carcass traits, black-hided, homozygous black-hided bull, and capture a lot of those things and sell those on a commodity market and capture some of the premiums from that while still capturing all of the cost savings of having a maternal herd. So that's one thing. And the cool thing about having this type of an animal is that it opens you up to a bunch of premium opportunities through some sort of a grass finishing or high value add program like Nyman Ranch or our program, Grass Fed Cattle Company, or there's a lot of other ones, Thousand Hills Cattle Company, Grassroots Farms, 99 counties here in Iowa. There's a lot of producer companies out there that are paying a premium wholesale to producers to produce grass finished beef, so you don't have to build the market, but you can capture a little bit of that premium. I think that's all I had. Any questions? Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. I can take questions or just hang out. So, yeah. Sure. The question was, we moved our calving season back by 2.5 months. What did we see in the results of our bull sales and heifers and things? And one thing I'll say, we're very fortunate to be tied in with Farrow Cattle Company. Farrow Cattle Company has a spring yearling program and a fall long yearling 18-month program. And so we were in March, we were at the yearling program selling 12-month-old bulls. When we moved to May, we moved to their 18-month-old fall forage program. And so we still were able to market them through Farrow Cattle Company and get bull prices. We got the fall sales are slightly less price. People would rather get a bull in the spring and have less time to feed them before they get use out of them. So we get a little bit less per bull, but we're still able to capture a premium. A lot of seed stock producers I've talked to says, man, I would love to move my calving away, but to May, everybody expects a yearling bull in March. They want to be able to have those bulls ready to breed for January, February calving. If that's your context, you don't feel you have the ability to move your calving back because your bull customers might not support you anymore. They're not willing to move to buying a fall bull. That's something you gotta weigh. Yeah, that's a tough challenge. Does that answer your question somewhat? Yeah. Yeah. So that's another thing that I didn't get into here today, but I'll maybe address it now, is cows don't depreciate in a straight line. I have a slide, I thought I'm gonna put it in, but I didn't. I put it up and stuff, but Wally Olson, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Wally Olson. I've had him on my podcast a few times. Him, guys like Doug Ferguson, they talk about sell by marketing and understanding the value of not just every class of animal, like cows, backgrounders, calves, but understanding the value of every age of cow. There's a difference in your value of your cow that's 3 years old versus a 5-year-old versus a 7-year-old versus a 9-year-old. And there's typically this depreciation bell curve on cows that calf, follow my bell curve here that is in my head. Hopefully it translates to yours. But you've got a lean calf that's worth less than a bred heifer. Oftentimes a bred heifer is worth slightly less or not the same as maybe a 3-year-old cow because she's proven she's still got a lot of life left in her. There's less risk. And then that 3-year-old cow about the same or slightly more than a 4-year-old. It's worth slightly more than a 5-year-old. Then the cow starts to depreciate pretty quickly from that 6, 7 years. The difference in a 5-year-old and a baby is a lot different than the value between a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old cow. And then the difference between an 8-year-old cow and a 10-year-old cow, maybe not all that much difference. So there's a lot of depreciation that takes place between 5 and 8 years. And so to minimize the depreciation of the cow, not only might it be advantageous to keep a cow as long as possible, that's one way to minimize depreciation. There's some people that completely eliminated their depreciation because they might buy a bred heifer for $2,000. They'll sell a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old for $2,000. So they're not taking any depreciation. But if they hunt them until 7 years, they might have depreciated to a fortune. Or my father-in-law is a therapist in South Minnesota. He has like 400 cows. He's a master at finding undervalued older cows. He buys like 8-year-olds for $1,200. And then he breeds them for another 40 years, gets 4 or 5 cows, and sells them as a call for $1,000. So he's taking very little depreciation, maybe 30, 40 bucks a calf in depreciation by buying already depreciated cows. So you have a herd of cows. You should almost break them out by year and say which age is the most likely to depreciate next year. So maybe you want to, Wally also talks about a 5 and out year program. Keep your cows for 5 years, sell them, let somebody else take the depreciation out. That might be one thing to minimize your depreciation. But you don't want to be the guy that takes the depreciation, essentially. Don't buy a 5-year-old cow and sell it. You might just take a $300 a calf in depreciation. So does that make sense? That didn't answer your question specifically. So, as seed stock producers, we haven't probably seen the longevity potential of our cows as much as other people because we're selecting harder on feeding udders. We have perfectly functional cows that could breed 5, 10 more years that we call because their udder isn't quite what we'd like to see. So, we tend to have a younger herd because we call them harder than other people. Maybe put on those phenotypic traits that they may be perfectly fine for another 5, 10 years. We don't get to see it. So I can't tell you how long we could get out of our cows. We have several 13-year-old cows. And again, back to the benefit of those 13-year-old cows. If you see a 13-year-old cow with a 5-star udder, well, that's a beautiful thing. You might have a question. Any other questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for talking about other online classes. We're trying to figure out a financial plan for the department. I always ask about that because we are small, we both have jobs.
Yeah.
How do you come up with that?
Yeah.
All this other stuff, and they're like, oh, we don't count that.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it's okay, so I wanted to thank you.
Oh, happy to do it. It was one of those, well, I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing, because I think once we went to that, my dad realized maybe this farm I shouldn't sell it to you as cheap as I should have was before. Once he started realizing that there was a lot of value and equity in the farm, and maybe we should discuss this after I got you. But it's good to discuss where, what the true costs are. And like I highlighted there earlier, is I have no problem with you doing anything once you have that information, but at least have the information so you can make decisions with clear eyes. Anything else? ready to sleep with this drone in voice here. Very good, my friends.
All right, thanks everybody. We will have the book fair in the back of the room at about 6 o'clock. Because we are a smaller group, the bar is not set up in here, but if you're looking for drinks, grab them from the casino and bring them back in. Otherwise, it would be a great time to check out all of the silent auction items.
Oh, you got a cold, those coming.